Could you and a total stranger on the other side of the planet be far closer relatives than you could ever believe? Not in a warm, poetic sense. Literally, biologically, written into your DNA right now. Here's the promise. By the end of this, you'll see exactly how our species was squeezed down to almost nothing, why that near-death event turned all 8 billion of us into a single family, and the precise moment your family tree came within a whisker of ending forever. We'll walk the whole timeline, from a collapse 900,000 years ago to the survivors you are descended from today. Start with something that quietly unsettled geneticists the moment they finally had the tools to see it. Take two humans, any two, from opposite ends of the earth, people who look nothing alike, speak different languages, and share not a single recent ancestor anyone could name. Read their DNA, letter by letter. You would expect enormous differences. You would be wrong. Two humans from different continents are astonishingly, almost suspiciously similar, far more alike beneath the skin than the surface ever suggests. And that uniformity is not normal for a species scattered across an entire planet. So the obvious question becomes, similar compared to what? Compare us to our closest living relatives, and the strangeness turns into something almost alarming. A single troop of chimpanzees living on one hillside in Africa can carry more genetic variation than the entire human species, all 8 billion of us, across every continent, combined. Read that again slowly. One group of chimps on one hill is more genetically diverse than everyone you have ever met, everyone you will ever meet, and everyone alive in the modern world put together. Something flattened us. Something squeezed our whole species through a gap so narrow it stripped away almost all our variety. And that squeeze has a date. In 2023, a team led by Wangji Hu published a study in the journal Science that read that squeezed straight out of the genomes of people alive today, using a method that reconstructs the size of ancient populations from the DNA still circulating in our cells. What they found rewrote the opening chapter of the human story. Around 900,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens even existed, our ancestral population didn't merely shrink or drift downward. It collapsed. It fell off a cliff. And the number they landed on is the whole reason your family tree, statistically, should not exist at all. Breeding population of our ancestors dropped to roughly 1,280 individuals. Not 1,280 in one valley. 1,280 on the entire planet. That is a large school, a modest concert crowd, the whole reproductive future of humanity, standing in a single field. And this was not one bad decade they gritted through and recovered from. According to that study, our ancestors were pinned at that razor-thin number for around 117,000 years. For over 100 millennia, humanity was a rounding error. One drought, one disease, one run of bad luck away from vanishing completely. So what nearly finished the job? The prime suspect is climate. This long window lines up with a brutal shift in the planet's cycles. Extended, punishing glacial periods, plunging temperatures, and African droughts that dried up the resources small bands leaned on to survive. A population that small carries almost no buffer against disaster. One failed season, one illness sweeping through, one stretch of unlucky births, and the line simply ends. Not for a family, for the entire species. And yet, somehow, they held on, barely, for more than 1,000 centuries. But surviving that first bottleneck was not the end of the danger. It was only the first time your ancestors nearly disappeared. And here's a thread I want you to hold on to, because it makes all of this personal. Hidden inside your cells is a tiny loop of DNA called mitochondrial DNA, and you inherited it from only one person. Your mother, who got it only from hers, who got it only from hers, in an unbroken chain of women stretching back into deep time. Follow every living person's chain backward, and they all converge on one single woman. Scientists call her Mitochondrial Eve. She was not the only woman alive in her day. Remember that. It matters enormously later. But every human breathing right now carries her line. Keep her in mind. Because that 900,000-year collapse was not the last time we were nearly erased. Move forward to around 74,000 years ago, when a supervolcano called Toba erupted in what is now Sumatra, one of the largest eruptions in millions of years, hurling ash across the world and, some argue, tipping the planet into a volcanic winter. For years, a popular theory held that Toba slashed the human population back down to just a few thousand survivors. The evidence for Toba doing that specifically is now fiercely debated, and many researchers doubt it. But the genetic fingerprint of a squeeze around that era is real, and it points at a single doorway that everyone alive today walked through. That doorway is the exit from Africa. Every non-African person alive today, every European, every East Asian, every indigenous American, every Pacific Islander, descends from a small founding band that walked out of Africa somewhere between 50 and 70,000 years ago. Not millions of people. A few thousand at most carried the entire genetic inheritance of the rest of the world out through that single gate. Everyone outside Africa, without exception, is descended from that one narrow group of travelers. And that fact sets up a pattern you can actually see written across the whole planet, spreading outward like the rings inside a tree. It's called the serial founder effect. Every time a small group split off and pushed further from Africa, they carried with them only a slice of the diversity of the group behind them, and the next group carried only a slice of that slice. Therefore, the further a population settled from Africa, the less genetically diverse it tends to be, in a smooth, almost startlingly measurable decline. Populations at the very end of that long march, deep in the Americas, are the least diverse of all. Human diversity did not scatter randomly across the map. It drained, step by step, from a single source, and that source keeps pointing straight back at a family. Which brings us back to Mitochondrial Eve, and to her counterpart, Y-chromosomal Adam, the man every living male's unbroken father line converges on. Here's the trap almost everyone falls into. They picture a couple, alone in a garden, the parents of us all. That is completely wrong. Eve and Adam almost certainly never met, and probably lived tens of thousands of years apart. Neither was ever the only person of their sex alive. They are simply the lines that survived, the ones that didn't hit a dead end when a bottleneck slammed shut on everyone around them. Every other line from their era was quietly pruned away. What survived the squeeze is precisely what you are made of. Now separate two ideas that sound identical but truly aren't. Your genetic ancestors are the ones who left traceable DNA inside you. Your genealogical ancestors are everyone you actually descend from, and that number explodes as you climb backward. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8, 16, doubling every single generation, until within just a few dozen generations the number of ancestral slots in your tree is larger than every human who has ever lived. There is only one way to fill all those slots. The same people must appear in your tree again and again and again. The statistician Joseph Chang worked out exactly what that mathematically forces to be true for all of us. It means that if you go back far enough, and far enough is shockingly recent, not tens of thousands of years, but a few thousand, you reach a point where every single person then alive who left any descendants at all is an ancestor of every single person alive now. Not some of us, all of us. Now thread it all together. A species crushed down to Wentori for over 100,000 years, funneled again through the shadow of catastrophe, poured through one narrow exit from Africa, its surviving lines converging on the same handful of mothers and fathers. That is not a metaphor. That is the literal reason all 8 billion of us are one family. Because we are all that a near extinction left behind. Your family tree didn't nearly die. It did die, almost entirely. You are standing on the single branch that never snapped. That's the strange gift of the bottleneck. Humanity is so tightly, undeniably close-knit precisely because we were so very nearly wiped out. If you want to keep pulling threads like this one, the next story is already waiting on your screen. Go find out what else your ancestors only just survived.